Hi, I'm Josh. I'm the manager here at the Monte Bello tasting room.
Hi everybody, I'm Lauren Lyall. I'm the assistant winemaker at Monte.
And today we're going to be unboxing our spring release of the Z List for 2026.
Z List is all about exploring old vine Zinfandel across California. We've got Paso, Green and Red, Geyserville, and East Bench all in front of us. So we're really looking forward to diving a little bit deeper into each one of these wines today.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is really awesome about this particular club for our members, though, is that you really get some of, I think, our best old vine Zinfandels.
Within this individual pack, there's something for everybody, right? So Paso, a little bit more approachable early on, but then we have something like East Bench, which is definitely something that can cellar for longer, something that you can hold on to, see how it develops over time.
Since we have our 2024s, for this year, how do you think the vintage has affected, let's say, the fruit that we see in the Zinfandels?
2024 was one of those Goldilocks vintages where we had those nice warm summer days, which really helped with achieving that not only sugar but phenolic ripeness as well. So you'll notice that in these wines there's lots of balance with fruit intensity, but because we tend to pick at more restrained Brix levels, you'll get still that nice kind of thread of acidity throughout these wines.
Well, I guess we can talk a lot about these wines, but why not just taste them as well?
That sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
So really cool thing is our production crew just went to Paso actually, and we visited the Doozy Ranch, which is actually where we get these grapes from. And it was able to give us quite a bit of context around this fruit and Paso as a region itself. Doozy Ranch is pretty spectacular in the fact that it has these incredible old head train vines. It benefits from not only the microclimate in this region of Paso, but also Paso actually has quite a high percentage of limestone in its soil. It mimics a lot of those great characteristics that we can experience up here on the mountain too.
When you are physically there at Doozy Ranch, what are some things about being in that vineyard where you feel like when you're there in the middle of the vineyard, it kind of sets that apart from when you're walking through some of the other properties that we source from?
Gosh, just seeing the gnarly old vines with the history attached to where this fruit is sourced is incredible. It's a multi-generation operation at Doozy Ranch, and so it's really cool to hear, from a first-person perspective from this family about what it was like to establish this vineyard and farm these grapes over all these years.
When would you open a bottle like this? And who might you share this with?
So the awesome thing about this wine is it definitely is made in this drink now style, right? There are some characters to it that would allow it to age, but I think it's going to reach its maximum drinking potential within the next 5 to 7 years. This is just, so approachable, easy drinking, light on the palate, but, it's got a decent amount of that generous, ripe fruit character.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how you get good fruit intensity, and you would expect this to be like almost a fruit bomb at first when you sip this, and then you realize there's still a bit of a freshness. When you said a lightness to it, I think that makes it really attractive as a Zinfandel. What else is happening down in Paso?
We have a new tasting room down in Paso, which is awesome. So we've had a long-standing foothold in Paso, and it just made sense for us to also put some real tangible roots there as far as an ability for people to taste our wines more readily down in that area. It's an inviting, open, clean space that people can come taste this wine and taste plenty of other wines that Ridge makes.
Our tasting room down in Paso is right on Ramada Row, so almost next to Tin City and a stone's throw away from Doozy Ranch itself.
So first impressions with this wine versus, say, the Paso that we tasted earlier, much more structured, but also very generously ripe fruit as well. I think that this is kind of the theme we're seeing with the 24s is nice, big, expressive, dark fruits for Zinfandel specifically.
Yeah. I think one of the things that always draws me to this wine is kind of that structure. It makes it really attractive to have with food. That kind of signature, almost a bit of like an herbaceousness in that Zinfandel has always made green and red stand out amongst our very long Zinfandel lineup, and makes it very memorable for me as a Zin.
Probably one of the most common questions we get is, why is it called green red, right? And that is due to the variation in the soil types within this one vineyard. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Josh.
Yeah, sure. So they have the green serpentine and red shirts that is inside of the soil. And then when if you guys ever have a chance to go to green and red, you'll notice how the vineyards there's a section that's beautifully terraced. And it's kind of like us here at Monte Bello. They're nestled in the mountains.
You know, growing at elevation really does help retain that natural acidity that we're always after. So this is a perfect example of a wine that has ripe, generous fruit, but still has tension there because of the structure, because of the acidity.
And this is one where I highly recommend everybody to have this with a meal. This is, I don't want to call it table wine, but it's definitely wine for the table.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about Zinfandel as well, is that it's such a food-friendly wine. It can be paired with so many different dishes, and so I can only imagine what we could cook up and pair this with. Geyserville Vineyard. Many people will be wondering why it is called Geyserville Vineyard now on the label, and this is the same wine we make every year. The only difference is that we have added vineyard to the label to distinguish the wine coming from a vineyard from the town itself.
This vintage really tastes amazing. So can you speak to anything about the winemaking maybe for this vintage that really helps us to represent Geyserville Vineyard in the best possible way for this release?
Yeah, well, honestly, nothing too dissimilar on the winemaking front. I mean, we treat all of our wines almost exactly the same because we really do try to let the vineyard speak for itself. As far as winemaking goes, same process as we employ for all of our other single vineyard wines. But I think, like I mentioned before, 2024 was just an incredible year as far as grape growing season goes. Just getting that amazing optimal ripeness, but still obviously retaining that beautiful acidity. So for me, this wine is so complex on the nose and the palate.
I think another thing I really love about having a Zinfandel that's this complex but still very approachable, this almost becomes like a gateway drug to fine wine. And I think that's another thing that speaks really well to our Z-list wines, because sometimes I've got guests who come up here into the tasting room and they see that Ridge makes so many wines. They, of course, are going to ask me the question, well, Josh, like, where do I start from? And I always think that's something like Geyserville, where a person who's just dipping their toes into the fine wine will be able to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I feel like the thing that, does this wine so much justice is that composition of all those different varietals that work so seamlessly together to make this wine so just complex, nuanced, and you have not only Zinfandel, but Petit Syrah and Alicante Bouschet, all those other supporting varietals that you find in these historical Italian field blends that really just, showcase the importance of right grapes, right place.
One discussion that we have here in the tasting room very frequently, talking about all the different varietals in there, is like the role that it plays to create like the whole of the wine. You guys do really good work, I think, with this particular wine in always handling the structure so well, vintage after vintage. It does make the Geyserville, I think, way more age-worthy than a lot of other, not just Zinfandels, a lot of other wines. And I think that Zinfandel kind of has that reputation where you kind of drink it instantaneously, and I think that's okay to do with our wines, but there's something really special about how Geyserville is made, to your guys' credit at the Upper Winery, where you visit with the wine like this in 10 years, and it's a whole other experience than it is on release, right?
Those tannins soften, of course. You get those really complementary tertiary characters in the wine as well at that point, and it really does just become the wine, but a more expressive, nuanced version of when it was more primary fruited up front in its younger years. And so giving it some age can really pay off.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to remind people that they have a payoff with this wine in a few years. It's kind of a difficult case to make when you're tasting the wine, even on release, because it's already so delicious, though. But I guess that's why we include, 2 bottles. Right?
Exactly.
With the release.
You can drink one now, but save one for later and see how it develops.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always see a lot of those like aha moments. You can see it in someone's eyes when they taste a really good aged wine for like the very first time. It makes a deep impression. And also, as we talk about aged wines, maybe for some of our newer members who haven't been with Ridge for quite as long, I don't want you guys to feel left out. From the library releases, we do some of that patience for you is kind of how I like to talk about it here in the tasting room. So we do make some of our library releases available exclusively to members so that you can already see how these wines are having some age on that. And I find that that's always a really good encouragement for people to actually lay down at least 1 or 2 of their wines from these releases. And also, Geyserville is one of several wines that we have on a vintage tracker. So if you ever want a recommendation on whether to hold or to crack that bottle open, we have your back.
All right, so 24 East Bench. This wine was originally released every spring in our Z list. We have now taken it out of our standard allocation. It is now an optional wine. It's been replaced by the green and red.
Yeah, and one of the great things about the optional wines that just lets you either customize or maybe even add an extra bottle if you really love the release. We keep the membership nice and flexible for that reason. So if you guys are ever up here in the tasting room and you got questions about the wine or you want to switch things around, we'll help you out with that.
So for me, the East Bench, the tannins are much more up front on the palate, and I feel like this wine definitely will benefit the most from aging.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of East Bench as almost like the Bordeaux lovers Zinfandel because of how the tannins are. And when you lay this wine down, I think even for just like 3 to 5 years, the payoff is incredible.
Absolutely.
On the East Bench. Something else that's just really awesome about East Bench that I don't think that everyone is necessarily aware of, even longtime members, is that East Bench is basically attached to Lytton Springs, just south of the main part of the estate. This is Ridge farmed and Ridge planted. And we started planting these rows of 100% Zinfandel just at the turn of the century between 2000 and 2001. So it does sound like new school Lytton relative to Lytton's like 1901, 1910, like vines and whatnot. But this is a property that I think is reaching this amazing amount of like maturity at a quarter of a century. And I think like, it's gonna be really exciting in the coming vintages to see how East Bench continues to give us some really awesome fruit.
Absolutely, and I love that you pointed out that this is 100% Zinfandel versus some of our other wines, which we talked about, field blends. And so this is a great example of how powerful and complex a single varietal Zinfandel wine can be.
I don't want to say that it is like a more serious wine per se, but sometimes like if you just want to open a bottle that just has like just something a little bit more. It's not your usual Wednesday night, but you want to elevate it a little bit. East Bench absolutely does that. So now that we have tasted all 4 of the wines from our club release in spring, some food pairing ideas that I've had as we tasted through this, like Paso. If I'm grilling something and I just want to drop a bottle of barbecue sauce all over some meat, then right, that sounds like something that we would definitely do with a Paso, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then when we're talking about green and red, like rack of lamb, these wines are so versatile, right? So, some are going to be better paired with something a little bit lighter meats, whereas maybe Geyserville, because of all those like beautiful baking spice characters that sometimes we can find in Geyserville, anything around the holidays, great pairing for Thanksgiving and Christmas meals.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to tell people, since you're talking about Geyserville during the holiday season, like if you bring a Geyserville to a family gathering, right? Like
you're the favorite person.
You are the favorite person, right? And this stuff comes in magnums, by the way, just so you guys know. And then we've got the East Bench, really grill a steak.
Yeah.
A little bit of salt, pepper, and olive oil or something like that with the East Bench, and keep it simple. I don't want to reinvent the wheel here.
It could definitely hold up to a steak.
Yeah, for sure.
So the way that we have the wines lined up actually is probably our preferred opening drinking order. So I think that, stylistically, the Paso with its vibrant primary fruit characters could easily be open first. Whereas the latter three wines definitely have a little bit more structure in order of, least to greatest. And so I would recommend maybe opening those. What would you say, green and red in Geyserville versus East Bench?
Yeah, sometimes, hotly debated topics here in the tasting room. I think that because Paso is just, it's got big fruit. So you got instant gratification with Paso as a result. But yeah, green and red, Geyserville and East Bench, you're never in a rush to really drink them. I agree with you that we could probably just, drink these kind of in that order. But who knows? Members, if you guys also have some feedback on that one and you come up with an order that works for you, you should tell us here in the tasting room.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the idea of opening one now, seeing how it's showing when it's young, fresh and vibrant, fruit forward, and then seeing how they age over time. You might notice that you like to open it in the 6 to 7 year window, or you might like it in the 10 to 15 year window. It really just depends on personal preference.
Yeah, but that's what keeps Ridge wines so much fun. You find your own personal sweet spot in terms of how you want to treat your releases, how soon you want to drink them, how long you want to cellar them for. I think people are just going to have a great time regardless of how they choose to move forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for hanging in there with us as we talked about our Z-List release. All of the individual tasting notes can be found on our YouTube channel, and we hope that you check them out.
Thanks for joining us.